The 15th nanny to leave the Grayson estate looked like she'd just survived a small war. Flour clung to her shoes, strands of confetti tangled in her hair, and a streak of blue paint, source unknown, stained her back. The automatic gate closed quietly behind her. No goodbyes, no one to stop her. Only the familiar silence of a home long accustomed to short-lived farewells. 15 people, in just 1 year. A household with 3 6-year-olds, and a father too busy to realize that the storm wasn't coming from outside. It was rising from fractures never touched. The following Monday morning, Elise Carter stood before that same gate, as a pale mist still hung in the air, and the cold lingered from a winter not yet willing to leave. She carried nothing but an old canvas bag, a thick ash-gray coat, and a gaze that revealed little. Before her stood the grand estate, proud yet quiet, as though even it had grown weary of trial and error. And it was in that very moment when Elise placed her hand on the iron gate, stepping across the threshold between departure and staying, that the first note of change was struck. A change that wouldn't come from shouting matches or emergency meetings, but from someone patient enough not to walk away. 1 year earlier, Amelia died on an early winter morning, when the sky was still slate gray and the trees in the garden hadn't yet shed their leaves. The once warm and lively estate suddenly felt terrifyingly vast, as if time itself had stretched out after her death. The woman who once stood by the stove each morning, who braided Jenny's hair, straightened Danny's sleeves, reminded Tommy not to scrunch his face while brushing his teeth, was gone. Everything happened too fast, too quietly. Just 2 months earlier, Amelia had still been bringing lunch to her husband's study, still thinking the dull stomach pain was from something spicy she'd eaten. But it wasn't. It was pancreatic cancer, terminal stage. When Nathaniel received the biopsy results, the doctor just looked at him and shook his head. No one is ever prepared to lose the person they love like that. There was no time to cry, no time to be angry, only the hollow emptiness that gnawed away at each passing day. Nathaniel didn't scream. He didn't collapse. He did what people used to, being in control, often do. He buried himself in work. The office became his refuge. Meetings, contracts, numbers, they all helped him delay the moment he would have to enter the empty bedroom next door. In the first few days, Clarice tried to urge him to rest, but that man had long learned to live by reason. He couldn't slow down, because if he stopped, the grief would drown him like a crashing wave. The 3 children were different. They had nowhere to hide. The house became a battleground, with no one at the helm. Breakfast turned into a silent hour, where each child found whatever they could to eat, or nothing at all. Clothes were a mess, toys scattered everywhere, and arguments grew louder with each day. Tommy, once the model big brother, now withdrew, his eyes always bracing for confrontation. Danny, impulsive and hot-tempered, became the epicenter of every shouting match. And Jenny, the youngest, didn't cry, didn't call for her mother. She simply stayed quiet, clutching her stuffed rabbit and hiding under the table whenever someone shut a door too hard. The first nanny left after 3 days. The second lasted a week. The ones after, no matter how experienced or well-qualified, all gave up. Some cried when they left. Some said nothing at all. Others left behind notes that read, "I don't think I'm enough," or "They don't need a nanny. They need a miracle." Clarice, who had witnessed it all, began hiring new people with the eyes of someone who had seen too many storms, no longer expecting success, only hoping the next person would last more than a month. 15 people, in 10 months. The last one left on a Monday morning, her shoes still dusted with flour and orange juice. She didn't look back. Elise Carter, 25 years old, sat in a small room just big enough for a dining table, a single bed, and an old wooden bookshelf. Outside the window, rain tapped against the peeling window ledge, as if it too was weary from the long stretch of damp weather. On her computer screen, job listings kept scrolling by, line after line, looking for a nanny with a degree in child psychology, preference given to candidates with references from prestigious preschools, minimum 5 years experience at a recognized educational institution. Elise had worked as a nanny for nearly 8 years unofficially, not for high pay, without certificates, but every child she cared for called her the last one who didn't leave. Still, in this city, Kindness wasn't enough to pass the resume filter. Wealthy families never read to the bottom line. They didn't see the most extraordinary thing about her: the ability to recognize a child's pain without anyone saying a word. Because Elise had once been that child. At 7 years old, she lost both parents in a suburban bus accident. The foster care system at the time was overwhelmed and unfeeling, shuffling her from one home to the next like a living package. Once, she stayed with a family for exactly 3 days before being returned, simply because she didn't like pea soup. Elise quickly learned how to be silent, how not to expect anything, and how to hold herself tight when she woke up startled in the middle of the night. By the time she aged out of the system at 18, she had nothing but an old suitcase, a knitted scarf from Miss Marion, the only gatekeeper who had ever smiled at her genuinely, and one belief: children don't rebel when they're loved enough. Pain didn't make Elise weak. It gave her eyes to see what others missed, that anger isn't always defiance, and a mischievous child isn't necessarily a bad one. She had once cared for a boy who threw things every time he was sad just to get the attention he had never received. Elise understood that without needing to read it in any textbook. That night, just as she was about to close her laptop, she saw a job posting from a large estate in the Grayson area, seeking experienced nanny for 3 6-year-old children. Previous applicants found this position highly challenging. Competitive salary. She almost skipped it. The word challenging read like a disguised warning. But as someone who had learned to read between the lines, Elise understood. That was how the wealthy said they were desperate. She searched the name in the job post. Grayson Estate. A few clicks led her to news stories long buried, but still haunting. Amelia Grayson passed away from illness 10 months ago, leaving behind her husband, Nathaniel Grayson, and their 6-year-old triplets. The family has hired 15 nannies in less than a year, all of whom quit after just a few weeks. Elise sat still. The blurred grayscale photo in the article showed 3 children eerily alike, eyes wide, not smiling, looking at them. She saw herself at 7, an expression that seemed to ask, "If I hurt you first, will you leave too?" She closed her eyes for a long time, not to think, but to listen to that instinct that had once saved her from losing her way in life. Then she reopened her laptop, skipped the professional qualifications box, didn't attach any reference letter. In the reason for applying section, she typed just one line: "I was once a child left behind." It was an afternoon that was neither too sunny nor too cold, the kind of weather that could fool someone into thinking everything was still fine. But in the second-floor study of the Grayson estate, the air was thick with fatigue. Nathaniel leaned back in his leather chair, flipping through the file of the 3rd applicant that day. The first page looked like something out of a magazine: degrees, skills, a letter of recommendation longer than a financial report. But in the end, when asked about the children, she said, "I think they need a strict routine and someone who won't compromise." The second one before her had been more poetic, comparing children to young shoots that need to be shaped with love. The first had even demanded double the salary because of the high-pressure environment. None of them were wrong, but none of them were right for this house either. When Clarice knocked to inform him that one candidate had arrived late, Nathaniel merely nodded out of habit. He no longer expected much. But when Elise walked in without an apology, without scrambling to explain, simply setting down her canvas bag, taking off her coat, and sitting across from him with a calm gaze, he suddenly felt uncomfortable. Not because she was rude, but because her presence was unusually quiet. "You didn't bring a resume?" Nathaniel asked, his voice tired. Elise shook her head. "I'm not good at writing about myself. Can you talk about yourself?" Then, Elise paused for a moment, then looked out the window, where the late afternoon sun cast shadows through a row of nearly bare maple trees. "I grew up in foster care. At first, I hated all adults. They came, they made promises, and then they disappeared. What I remember most was an old woman who used to bring bread. She didn't say much, just sat next to me and let me cry. One time, I asked her why she didn't ask anything. She said, 'You already have too many questions.' No one answered. 'I'm here so you don't have to ask one more.'" Ah! The room fell silent again. Nathaniel looked at Elise for a long time. For some reason, an image of Jenny appeared in his mind. The little girl curled up under the table yesterday, clutching her stuffed rabbit, refusing to come out just because it was too windy. What do you think of my 3 kids? He asked. Elise didn't answer right away. She tilted her head, as if listening to a sound from very far away. I think they're screaming in silence, each in their own way. But I don't see them as the problem. I just see children who need permission to be sad. Nathaniel said nothing, but when Elise left the room and Clarice came in, before she could ask anything, he simply said, "Call her, hire her. You sure? Not afraid she'll quit after another week?" Nathaniel's mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. I don't know what she'll do. But at least she's the first one who didn't look at the kids like a report that needs fixing. The first morning, at 6:30 a.m., Elise stood in front of the Grayson estate gate and took a deep breath. The early morning air was cold and damp, as if daring anyone to step into a new day unguarded. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, pressed the doorbell, and waited. Clarice opened the door, no smile, just a nod. Stepping aside, "Good luck," she said quietly, then disappeared into the back garden, as if unwilling to witness one more person turn away. Elise stepped into the house, barely had time to take off her shoes when splash. A bucket of water from upstairs poured down like a morning greeting. Cold water slid down her collar, tracing her spine. Elise looked up. Tommy was peeking over the second-floor railing, holding the rope attached to the now empty bucket. "Oh! Sorry, I forgot it's Thursday," he said, face blank. Before she could react, Elise heard a whoosh behind her. She turned. A cloud of flour burst into the air like celebratory smoke. Danny stood in the kitchen doorway, still holding the sifter, grinning wide. "You're new. Gotta have the baptism." Elise coughed softly, brushing the flour from her hair. No yelling, no scolding. She simply bent down, took off her shoes, and placed them neatly on the rug. By the arm of the sofa, a welcome sign was taped on with superglue, wrinkling the upholstery. On the pillow was a watercolor handprint. Beneath the coffee table, a barricade of toy cars blocked the path. Jenny sat curled up in the corner of the room, clutching a doll tightly to her chest, eyes wary. As Elise approached, the girl let out a scream, not a cry, a scream, as if it were her last firewall against the world. Elise stopped, didn't touch her, just sat down a few steps away. Jenny stared at the unfamiliar woman, then suddenly hurled the doll toward Elise. Its head hit the wall, rolled, and landed with its hair tangled. The room fell silent. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Danny held his breath. Elise remained seated, picked up the doll, didn't fix the hair, didn't dust it off, only placed it gently on the carpet right within Jenny's reach. No one said a word. Elise didn't try to make conversation. No coaxing. No, I understand, like the ones before. She just sat there, flour still clinging to her shoulders, cold water soaking her back, tape stuck in her hair, but she didn't leave. After 10 minutes, Danny picked up a marker and started drawing eyebrows on a pillow. Tommy lightly kicked the toy car barricade aside. Jenny didn't move closer, but she didn't scream again either. She just looked at Elise, then suddenly pulled the doll back and hugged it tightly, as if nothing had ever happened. Elise didn't know how long that moment would last, but she knew that in eyes long accustomed to being left behind, someone who stayed was the first seed of trust. She sat there, soaked and smudged, but with a warmth inside, like sunlight piercing the thickest winter cloud. The media crisis. It began with an anonymous email, untitled, sent to the inboxes of 3 local newspapers at 2:13 a.m. The headline of the first article was brief: "The Grayson House and the Darkness Behind the Gilded Gate." Within less than 12 hours, the story had spread across every parent group in the district. An anonymous account posted what was claimed to be behind-the-scenes images: a flour-stained shirt, paint smudges on the carpet, and a chilling caption: "Nanny number 16 still hasn't left." But it doesn't seem to be out of respect. Elise woke up that morning to find her name tagged in hundreds of comments. Some people defended her, saying the media was exaggerating, but most did not. Phrases like psychological abuse, labor exploitation, soulless rich people started flooding the threads. Several parents at the children's school simultaneously signed a petition demanding a CPS inspection, citing a potentially unstable educational environment That afternoon, Elise sat alone in the living room. The lights off, the lazy late-day sunlight crept through the curtains, casting pale shadows across her face. On her phone, a message from an old friend lit up the screen. "You should leave. They're not going to protect you." She didn't reply. She just placed the phone face down on the table and leaned her head gently against the back of the chair. Inside her, an old wind rose again. The feeling she knew too well from her childhood, sitting by the orphanage window, knowing she had been forgotten. Nathaniel walked in, shirt still creased from an emergency meeting. He meant to say something, then didn't. He had never felt this helpless. He was a man who had negotiated with billion-dollar CEOs without blinking. And yet now, standing before Elise, her head bowed, he didn't know what to do except remain still. It was Clarice who broke the silence. "You don't have to go through this," she said, placing a gentle hand on Elise's shoulder. "I've seen good people walk away, not because they were weak, but because this world is too quick to condemn." Elise looked up. Her eyes weren't red, but the light in them had dimmed. "Was I wrong to think staying would be enough?" Clarice didn't answer right away. She looked toward the small photo frame on the bookshelf, an old picture of Amelia holding the 3 children, faces smeared with ice cream, smiling wide. She remembered how, in those early days, even Amelia had been deemed unsuitable simply because she didn't fit the mold of the perfect mother society adored. "Elise, you're not wrong," Clarice said slowly. "It's just, the world always rushes to punish those who choose to love quietly." They both stayed silent for a long time. Outside, the wind rustled through the old maple trees. Inside, Jenny was quietly drawing a circle on paper with a pencil. Danny was trying to reassemble a model airplane, and Tommy sat by the window, staring out at the deep purple sky. No one knew that this media crisis would become a turning point. But for now, to Elise, it was just another storm, and she didn't yet know how long she could keep standing. A letter from Amelia. Elise found the letter one quiet evening, while searching for a children's book to read to the kids, hoping to bring some calm back to their hearts. As she opened the first page, a small folded piece of paper slipped out handwritten, slanted gently. Familiar, like the breath of someone who had once belonged to every corner of the house. It was a letter from Amelia. "Nathaniel, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. I'm sorry. Not for leaving? That was beyond my control. But for all the things I didn't have time to teach the kids. I wish I had more time, just one more spring, to show Jenny how to braid her hair, to hold Danny's hand across the lawn without shouting, 'Be careful,' and to watch Tommy learn how to hide his sensitivity behind his toughness. But I wasn't given that gift. My love, I know you're strong, and logic has always been your armor. But remember, the kids don't need a commander. They need a home where they believe that even when everyone leaves, someone will stay. Tommy won't say it, but he's afraid of being forgotten. Danny gets angry easily, but only because his heart is too big. And Jenny will retreat if she's not seen with gentleness. You only need to be someone patient enough to stay when they're angry, quiet when they need it, and to hold them without asking for anything in return. I'm not here anymore to rock them to sleep or wipe their tears. But I believe that if you let love lead instead of duty, they'll grow like saplings, shaped by the wind, not perfectly straight, but strong. I love you, and I believe in you." Amelia. She sat on the edge of the bed, the light from the night lamp casting shadows on the paper, making the ink look as if it had just dried. She read each word slowly, afraid of losing something between the short lines. As she reached the last sentence, her hand trembled slightly. A memory surfaced, a piece of the past she had tucked away, like an old, fraying sweater at the back of a drawer. As a child, Elise once hid in the orphanage garden, just to escape the fights between the other kids. It started to rain, and she curled up like a stray kitten. The only person who found her was Miss Marion, the elderly gatekeeper close to retirement. She didn't scold her. She just sat quietly next to Elise, slipped a terry cloth towel into her hands and said, "You don't have to be strong, but if you keep sitting here, the rain might think you want it to hold you forever." That night, Elise returned to her room, soaked to the skin, but strangely warm inside, and now, reading Amelia's words, She could almost smell that old towel, the kind of love that made no grand gesture, demanded nothing, but simply existed as a place for someone to rest in the storm. She placed the letter in the drawer and turned off the light. No promises, no grand decisions, just not leaving. The next morning, the sky was veiled in a soft mist, gentle like a sigh after a night of rain. Elise was in the kitchen early, her hair tied back neatly, hands moving swiftly as she prepared breakfast. On the table was a pot of hot tea and, next to it, a small porcelain plate with a stack of chocolate chip cookies, simple, but rich with the scent of butter and memory. She had gotten up before dawn to bake them, not to earn favor, and certainly not to teach a lesson, but because she missed her mother, and because she understood that sometimes the simplest things are the small flames that warm a cold heart. She didn't call the kids. She didn't explain why she was still there. She just quietly sprinkled a little sugar on top, the vanilla still lingering on her fingertips. Each cookie had a tiny heart, carved with the tip of a knife, a crooked shape she used to make back at the orphanage. When no one remembered her birthday, footsteps echoed. First came Tommy, his face as guarded as always, but this time he didn't say anything sharp. He just stood there, watching from a distance, as if trying to decide if something long forgotten had returned. Danny followed close behind, clutching his worn-out stuffed bear. Jenny came last, her eyes still puffy from crying, bare feet padding slowly across the cold wooden floor. The three of them stood silently, looking at Elise, no yelling, no throwing. No, why are you still here? Just quiet observation. Elise smiled faintly without turning around. She spoke just loud enough, as if to herself. When I was little, every time I missed my mom, I baked cookies. She used to say, "If you don't know what to say, let the smell speak for your heart." No one answered, but after a few seconds, the chair scraped back. Jenny sat down first. She didn't look at anyone, just reached for a cookie, sniffed it, then took a bite. Not long after, Danny and Tommy sat too. No arguing, no tears, just quiet eating. But it was the kind of silence that comes when children begin to lay down their weapons. Elise remained by the stove, stirring the porridge. She didn't celebrate. She didn't ask questions. She let the silence do its work. "Do you know how to tell stories?" Tommy spoke up, still not looking at her, his voice rough. Elise set the spoon down and turned. "Depends on whether the listeners can sit still." "I can," Jenny said softly, glancing at her brothers. Danny nodded. Tommy didn't say anything, but his eyes no longer held that guarded gleam. Just then, Clarice stepped into the kitchen. She paused at the sight before her. 3 children sitting properly at the table, cookie crumbs on their cheeks, but no tears, no shouting, no shattered dishes. Elise turned, giving a small nod, a silent good morning. Clarice said nothing, but at the corner of her lips was a smile so thin it looked like a thread, the kind reserved for the precious things we no longer dare to wish for. The miraculous day, that morning, the sky was unusually clear, as if the entire universe had exhaled a gentle sigh of relief. The early sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, falling onto the table like warm, honey-colored cloth. Elise had been up before sunrise. She brewed tea, baked another batch of chocolate chip cookies, not to comfort anyone, but because the scent of melting butter in the kitchen reminded her of the rare Sunday mornings at the orphanage, when sponsors came by and the children got sweet pastries instead of watery porridge. This time, she placed 3 colorful mugs on the table, no 2 alike, because children often liked having a cup that was their own. One was pale blue, another had a truck on it, and the third bore a faded moon, as if bleached by time. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, soft and hesitant. Tommy entered first. He didn't say anything, just caught the scent of the cookies and quietly went to wash his hands. Danny and Jenny followed right behind, their faces less tense than the day before. Elise didn't fuss over greetings, just smiled and nodded gently, as if everything about this morning was perfectly ordinary, as if they had been a little family for a long time. While the 3 children ate, Elise told a short story about a baker who got lost in the woods and was asked by 3 squirrels to bake a birthday cake for their mother. There was no moral lesson, just laughter when Elise described how one of the squirrels tasted the batter and sneezed because flour flew up its nose. After breakfast, Elise opened a cupboard and took out a small box containing a few packets of seeds. "The weather's nice today," she said. "How about we go to the garden and do something special?" The three kids looked at each other. Elise didn't explain much, just led them to the corner of the yard, where the grass grew tall and the soil was soft. Perfect for something she called a memory garden. She gave each of them a packet of seed sunflower, daisy, and mint. Pick something to plant in the ground. It could be something you want to keep, or something you're afraid will disappear. Tommy chose sunflower, he said softly, so Mom can see it from the sky. Danny chose mint, because Mom used to make mint tea when someone got sick. Jenny held the packet of daisy seeds, said nothing, and quietly dug a small hole using a spoon. Elise didn't preach or give advice. She just dug with them, hands muddy, clothes dirt-streaked, and her heart softened like moss after the rain. By noon, the four of them returned to the kitchen. Elise suggested baking an apple pie, and this time, no one threw flour or spilled milk. Danny cut apples carefully like a true chef. Jenny eyeballed the butter and counted each spoonful like she was casting a spell. Tommy was in charge of rolling the dough, and in one brief moment, when he struggled with the rolling pin, Elise reached behind him and guided his hands like an older sister. No one said anything, but the dough rolled out evenly, and Tommy's cheeks flushed a little. As the afternoon faded, Elise opened an old comic book and sat in the living room. Tommy sat beside her, shoulder almost touching. Danny lay sprawled on a pillow, hugging his stuffed bear. Jenny rested her head on Elise's lap, eyes half closed. Elise read slowly, word by word, as if weaving an invisible thread between their little hearts. When the main character got lost from his mother, Jenny asked softly, "Does his mom come back?" Elise didn't answer right away. She placed her hand on Jenny's hair, gently stroked. "No." But he still grew up, with a heart that always remembered her. That night's dinner was spaghetti and meatballs. Tommy rolled the meat. Danny made the sauce. Jenny picked a citrus-scented candle to light on the table. Elise wore a pale linen dress, flour dusting her collar, her loosely tied bun slightly askew. Clarice watched from a distance 3 children, a young woman unrelated by blood, and a kitchen filled with warmth. When Nathaniel came home, he froze at the doorway. The children were helping Elise set the table, no one yelling. Nothing broken. Elise saw him, nodded in greeting. On the table, there was an empty seat next to the truck-printed mug. After dinner, Elise didn't remind them to brush their teeth or change into pajamas. Strangely, everything unfolded as if there were already a schedule written inside their hearts. She sat in the bedroom, telling a story she made up about 3 children lost in the forest, who met a singing seed, a towel that wiped away tears, and a woman who wasn't their mother but didn't leave. By the time the story ended, Jenny was asleep. Danny had turned quietly toward the wall. Tommy lay still, eyes open. "Will you be here tomorrow morning?" he asked, not hiding the hope in his voice. Elise didn't answer right away. She leaned down, tucked in each child, then lit the cloud-shaped nightlight. "If you want more chocolate cookies," she whispered, "I might have to wake up early." The bedroom door closed softly, and inside, wounds began to mend, not with medicine, not with promises, but with love that asked for nothing in return. News about the Grayson case spread quickly. Flashing headlines lit up phone screens. Emotional abuse of a domestic worker. 3 unruly children of a billionaire family. "Will CPS step in?" Clarice grew increasingly tense. Nathaniel was quieter than usual. Elise said nothing, but every morning her eyes carried a trace of exhaustion, as if she had spent the whole night untangling knots in the children's souls with bare hands. And yet, in that house, amid the fear of judgment, something quiet was shifting. Elise didn't try to fix, she simply listened. When Danny threw a pillow on the floor in frustration, because his Lego spaceship still wouldn't come together, Elise didn't scold him or clean up right away. She sat down beside him, gently picked up a small piece, and asked, "Where do you want to fly it to?" That question, seemingly meaningless, made Danny look up. He hesitated, then whispered, "Somewhere Mom doesn't hurt." Elise nodded. She didn't smile, didn't offer hollow comfort. She just kept building with him, one piece at a time. Tommy, still the most guarded of the 3, began sitting closer whenever Elise read to Jenny. He didn't listen, but he didn't leave either. One afternoon, While Elise was folding laundry, Tommy handed her a small slip of paper, a crooked name tag that read, Elise, friend. Jenny was the first to change. One morning, she poured a glass of orange juice on her own and carefully brought it to the table, offering it to Elise with trembling hands. No words of thanks, no grand gesture. Elise simply accepted it, then took a small sip as if it were the best orange juice in the world. Clarice couldn't hide her surprise. They're different, she murmured as she watched Danny apologize on his own after dropping a glass of water. Jenny flinched, nearly burst into tears, but Elise just patted her head and said, It's okay. Slipping is no big deal. What matters is that you turned back and wanted to fix it. And then, the call from Child Protective Services came. Clarice set the phone down on the table, her hands trembling. They're coming to inspect, she said softly. Maybe to verify? Or maybe to... She couldn't finish the sentence. The final words swallowed by fear. The fear that the children might be taken away from this home, just as they were beginning to feel its warmth. Elise didn't question, didn't press. She just said one thing light, but laying the foundation for something bigger. We don't perform. They'll see what they need to see. The CPS inspection. Mrs. Denning, the investigator from CPS, arrived on a foggy morning that shrouded the entrance to the Grayson estate. She wore a pale gray shirt, a long black coat, and carried a thick folder. Her face was as stern as a timesheet without error. Elise answered the door. No smile, no tea. She simply nodded, then said softly, I suggest you stay the entire day. Don't let the children know you're here. And I won't tidy up or prepare anything special. Just treat it as a normal day. Mrs. Denning raised an eyebrow, as if she had never received an invitation quite so honest. Then she nodded. Good. Then let's begin. In the morning, Mrs. Denning took notes on every behavior, every gesture, and in those small, scattered details, something extraordinary began to emerge. Jenny quietly pulled out a chair for Elise, then poured a small glass of orange juice into the cup with a paper crane on it, the one she'd kept since her mother's memorial. Danny, when he dropped a spoon, bent down to pick it up and said sorry before anyone even noticed. Tommy didn't deny the messy handwriting on the wooden nameplate at the dining table. He simply pointed at it and told Elise, I can make a new one if you want. Elise didn't correct them, didn't instruct. She let everything unfold naturally. When Jenny ran to hug her leg after a midday nightmare, Elise knelt, whispered something in her ear that made Jenny nod, then returned to her room, as if she understood that fear was part of growing up. Mrs. Denning witnessed it all. No staging, no signs of training, just small acts, full of real people and real hearts. That afternoon, Mrs. Denning sat in the living room, hands resting on the now-closed folder. Clarice, Nathaniel, and Elise sat opposite her, silent, as if awaiting a verdict. But she simply said, In 20 years working in child protection, I've learned one thing. A home isn't defined by the brightness of its chandeliers or the thickness of its carpets, but by what you feel when you walk inside. She paused, eyes scanning the simple room filled with signs of life. Scribbled drawings on the fridge, cushions lying askew, a half-peeled orange carved into a smiley face left on the table. And today, I didn't see an investigation, she said, her voice slowing. I saw something that needs to be acknowledged. She looked directly at Elise. This is no longer a report. This is proof of what's right. No one said a word. But as Mrs. Denning left, Jenny ran to the porch. Not because she was told, but simply to wave. And Elise, from the kitchen doorway, gave a quiet nod to Clarice. No words were needed, because the most precious things are often the quietest. 6 months later, winter retreated gently, like a guest who had stayed just long enough. The trees in front of the Grayson estate began to bud. Young grass peeked through the hillside. 6 months hadn't erased every wound, but they were enough for the fractured pieces to begin forming the shape of a new picture, imperfect, but alive. Elise was still there, still waking early out of steady habit. But now, instead of baking alone in silence, she would often see Danny walk into the kitchen first, asking, Are we making chocolate filling or strawberry jam today? Elise would look at him, nod. We'll have to see what Jenny wants too. Jenny could now refer to Elise as she instead of that lady. One day, while coloring alone in the corner of the room, she suddenly looked up and asked, "Miss Elise, were you ever afraid of the dark?" Elise would answer with a story sometimes true, sometimes sprinkled with fairy tale about nights at the orphanage, when the only light was a candle stub burning under the blanket. Jenny would listen without blinking, then quietly slide the purple crayon over to Elise, like an invitation to help finish the picture. Tommy still spoke little, but his silence now carried a different tone, no longer guarded, but attentive. He watched Elise organize books, fix a door hinge, even started jotting notes into a little notebook whenever she did something cool. One afternoon, he approached her and handed over a hand-drawn page. "I'm writing a comic book. You're the main character." Elise was surprised, looking at the scribbled image of herself in a purple cape, holding a wooden spoon like a weapon. Below it were the scrawled words, "The Calm Night." She smiled, but didn't tease him. She understood it was a title meant for someone who stayed. Nathaniel no longer buried himself in work as a form of refuge. He shortened meetings, postponed pointless business trips, and showed up for dinner more often than before. One day, he asked Elise, "Do you think we should build a reading room for the kids?" Elise nodded, then added, "And a camping corner in the backyard. A place where the kids can teach grown-ups how to play again." Clarisse, once wary of Elise's stubborn innocence, now brought tea into the kitchen every morning and muttered, "One more batch of cookies won't hurt." Right. One Sunday morning, during parent-teacher day at Jenny's school, she was suddenly invited to read aloud. Elise's eyes widened slightly when Jenny chose a piece she had written herself. "Family is where someone stays, even when you scream, cry, or spill milk on the carpet. Family is where someone bakes every morning, then tells stories when you're too scared to sleep alone. Family is someone who doesn't leave, even when you push them away." The whole room fell silent for a few seconds. After class, Jenny gripped Elise's hand tightly. "I wrote that about you." Elise said nothing. She just leaned down, kissed Jenny's forehead gently, and whispered, "I know." That afternoon, the whole family worked in the backyard garden. Tommy packed the soil. Danny watered the plants. Jenny picked out pebbles. Elise planted a small lavender bush. When she stood up, Tommy stuck a handmade wooden sign into the ground. The garden of things that don't give up. No one knew what the future would hold. But in that moment, beneath the slanting sun, the Grayson family was no longer just a mansion holding 3 motherless children and a solitary father. It was a home patched together by patience, understanding, and the choice of someone who didn't walk away. Final chapter, the effect of those who stay. One late spring afternoon, Elise was sitting on the porch, swiftly stitching up the seam of Jenny's stuffed rabbit. The breeze brushed gently through her hair, carrying the faint scent of chocolate cookies from the afternoon snack. The atmosphere was so peaceful, it felt as though this place had never known tears, shouting, or heartbreak. Clarisse stepped out from the kitchen and handed her a cup of mint tea, speaking softly. "For the first time in almost 2 years, this house feels like a place where people actually live." Elise smiled and accepted the tea, but before she could respond, the sound of small, hurried footsteps came from the garden behind. Danny rushed over, his hands stained with ink. "You have to sign this," he exclaimed, holding up a thick invitation card trimmed with gold, an invitation to the end-of-year school ceremony. "Elise Grayson, guardian." The printed line made her freeze. The principal asked who would come with us. "We wrote your name," Danny said plainly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Tommy and Jenny came running too. Tommy slipped a green paracord bracelet onto her wrist, clearly handmade, while Jenny carried a drawing of 3 children and a woman reading stories under a lamp. Beneath the picture, the scribbled caption read, "Family is the one who stays." Elise couldn't say anything. She simply pulled all 3 of them into her arms, in a moment where the past no longer screamed, and the future no longer felt frightening. In the corner of the yard, Nathaniel stood quietly. He didn't step forward, didn't interrupt, just smiled. The man who once believed that providing enough material comfort was enough to build a home was now learning from the beginning, learning how to be present, how to love, and the most miraculous part was, he wasn't learning alone. That night, as the living room lights dimmed, Elise wrote a few lines in her notebook, then closed it. On the cover, she had changed its title from Nanny Journal to Things I Learned from Children Who Didn't Want to Be Loved. Outside in the garden, the wind kept blowing. The lavender swayed gently, like a whisper. And inside, 4 people not bound by blood, but by shared fractures were stitching themselves back together with the simplest, most enduring, and most miraculous thing, the choice to stay. If this story touched you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, just one story is enough to make someone feel a little less alone. Don't forget to follow and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next stories about love, gratitude, and the quiet strength of those who choose to stay. Because this world will always need more kindness. Thank you for listening.